Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in. This story is a direct continuation of emergency broadcast The Zombie Apocalypse Has Begun, which followed Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole, a Night Stalker crew chief who witnessed the first wave of the outbreak from the air. You can enjoy this one as a standalone, but for the full experience and deeper context, I recommend checking out the original broadcast linked below. Now let's get started. I don't remember the last time I believed in anything coming through a radio. The emergency channels have been dead for weeks, some looping nonsense from FEMA about shelter-in-place zones that don't exist anymore. Most survivors figured out pretty early that following orders only led to getting trapped, ambushed, or worse. But then, we heard something different. Not a loop, not a system broadcast. A man, human voice, calm, military, broken, but clear enough to know it wasn't staged. The transmission came in right after dawn 2 days ago, crackling through on 4.896 megahertz. He said his name was Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole, 160th SAW, Night Stalkers. He was transmitting from North Dakota. Not a safe zone, not even close. He was surrounded. He said he'd uploaded the truth, whatever that means, and now someone or something had cut off the feed. And then came the part that stuck with all of us. Don't look for survivors. Look for the transmitters. They're still broadcasting. He signed off after that. Dead air since. I'm Aaron Bell. Used to be an EMT. Minneapolis, Hennepin County. Lost my rig, my crew, and my city all in the same week. I've been surviving with a mixed group since then. Some ex-National Guard, a few civilians from the suburbs, and one guy who used to run a towing service out of Brooklyn Park. We've been holed up in a gutted retirement center on the western edge of St. Paul for a little over 3 weeks now. Close to the rail yards, close to the fuel lines, close to too many infected. We had to leave eventually. The broadcast just gave us a reason. I told the others, 5 of them, what I heard, played the recording, twice. No one questioned whether it was real, not after what we've seen. The hesitation wasn't about him, it was about heading north. Into the white, into open country where the cold doesn't care who you are, and the infected can keep moving even when the living can't. But we all knew the rules had changed. We weren't waiting for help. There was no help. But if Cole had something, proof, directions, anything, then maybe we could meet him. And if he didn't make it, then at least we'd know someone else tried. We prepped fast. We had 3 vehicles, and none of them were built for war. But they were all we had. The lead was an old F-250 with a welded snowplow, solid frame, loud engine. She drank fuel like a beast, but she could push through anything that wasn't bolted down. Behind that, we ran a beat-up Land Cruiser we'd reinforced with plate steel, mostly scrap from a collapsed farm shed. The last was a fuel truck we'd managed to hot wire out of a township depot about a week earlier. It was dented, loud, and always threatening to stall in the cold, but it kept us running. They weren't big, they weren't armored, but they were fast, tough, and still moving. And that was more than you could say for most. Enough to get us where we needed to go, if we didn't push them too hard. The team was tight. Sarah, a retired police officer from Bloomington, was our marksman. Sharp, controlled, always watching angles. Mitch ran point with the Land Cruiser. Ex-Army logistics, quiet guy, drove like every turn mattered. Jackie handled medical and fuel logistics, and her brother Noah, barely 19, ran the mounted spotlights and rear surveillance. The last man, Bryce, was built like a boulder and used to manage warehouse security at the Mall of America. He never said much, but he carried the biggest crowbar I've ever seen, and I never saw him miss. We left the compound at 0500 hours, before sunrise. Roads were buried under half a foot of snow, but the trucks cut through fine. We moved west on 94, crawling past the burned-out remains of Hudson, through scattered cars, and the rotting frames of big rigs collapsed across median barriers. The infected didn't come out in force that morning. Too cold. Most of them lay still in the snow, twitching in their own way, waiting for the wind to shift. Just past Menominee, we saw a checkpoint. Old state police barricade, crushed under a fallen highway sign. Blood across the guardrail. Blackened icicles hanging from a flipped ambulance. We stopped long enough to scavenge. Mitch and Sarah moved up while I covered the rear. We found what you'd expect. Supplies half looted, medicine frozen solid, a map folded under a helmet with the word void written across all the zones east of Fargo. The cold sank fast once the sun rose higher. That part of Wisconsin is nothing but open ridges and silent farms in winter. The infected don't sprint, they don't scream, but they notice. Every engine, every crunch of tires in fresh snow, every vibration in the ice. I could see them from the passenger side window, standing between trees, on the edges of empty cornfields, just watching, always facing toward us, like weather vanes caught in the pull of some invisible current. We didn't stop again until after midday. Burnett County, small town called Grantsburg. Population board said 1,367. We didn't see a single one of them. Bryce took the lead into the town square with Noah on the high beam. We kept the vehicles close, nose to tail in a rough wedge. There was no movement, no bodies, not even the smell of rot, just silence and a dry wind pushing dust across the frozen pavement. Mitch swept the general store. Jackie and I hit the pharmacy. Everything worth having was long gone. Except the bodies. They were inside, not out. Whoever had tried to hole up here hadn't been overrun. They'd been locked in, barricaded, maybe by someone else, maybe by their own. That's when Sarah found the note, nailed to the inside of a church door with a camp hatchet, scribbled on an old hymnal page. Left the radio on. He said to head north. So we did. If you're still here, I'm sorry. I couldn't watch them turn. Kay. The radio. Cole's voice again. We were tracking echoes. By dusk we were across the border. Minnesota gave way to the Dakotas like a breath falling out of a chest. Flat. Endless. Pale snow bleeding into grey sky. We pulled off the highway and made camp in the remains of a snowed-in rest stop off Route 2. Pushed the trucks into a semicircle against the wind. Ran blankets over the windows. No fires. That night, I walked the perimeter twice. I couldn't sleep. Every so often, the wind would die just long enough for something sharper to carry through. The grind of shifting snow, a distant metallic rattle, and once, a crunch that didn't come from drifting ice. It sounded like boots. Not heavy, not fast. Careful. Measured. I paused under the shadow of the fuel truck, rifle ready, scanning the tree line through the scope. Nothing moved. No shapes. No glint of gear or breath fog. I held still for 10 minutes, then walked a second loop. Still nothing. We posted Noah on second watch. The cold sank deeper after midnight. It was the kind that made your bones feel like old wood, creaking under the weight of just being. I tried lying down again, but sleep didn't come. Every noise pressed too sharply against my thoughts. The silence between them, even worse. Then came the break, a muffled shout. Too far to make out the words, but close enough that the tone was wrong, sharp and panicked. Then, the unmistakable pop of a suppressed shot. Not a backfire, not an echo, suppressed. A clean crack softened by a thread of cloth and a homemade baffle. I was already on my feet, boots sliding into snow as I grabbed my rifle and ran. The others stirred just as I hit the edge of the trucks. Bryce was a few steps behind. He kicked through the powder, wrenched open the rear panel on the flood rig, and pulled the spotlight cable. The yard lit in an instant. Sharp, white, hard shadows thrown against every surface. I turned my scope north, following the beam. That's when we saw them. 3 figures. Close. Too close. They'd crept up using the debris field at the far end of the lot for cover. Wrecked cars, old plow trucks, a trailer someone had tried to turn into a shelter years ago. They used the chaos like brush to hunt behind. Now they were running. One of them had a rifle slung and a small pack bouncing on his shoulder. The second was older, limping but moving fast. The third, closest, was holding something I couldn't see clearly. They sprinted across the lot, probably thinking the light was coming from inside the trucks. It wasn't. Mitch took the shot from the passenger seat of the Land Cruiser. First target dropped instantly, center mass. The pack slid off his back and hit the snow with a thud. The second tried to change direction, but Bryce's second round caught him in the side. He crumpled halfway through a pivot, blood already seeping into the snow. The third bolted, nearly made it to the tree line. Bryce went after him. I lost visual for maybe 5 seconds as they disappeared between the trucks and past the old rail mound. Then there was a grunt, a quick scuffle, and the sound of a body hitting ice. Bryce came back alone, dragging the man by his collar. When the dust settled, Jackie was face down in the snow. One shot, close range, stomach wound, the kind that doesn't kill fast, but always kills. We didn't understand at first. She'd been on perimeter rotation. We'd rotated late because of fuel transfer, and she'd insisted on covering that side solo. She must have spotted movement, moved in quietly, maybe even confronted them, then taken the shot before anyone else knew they were that close. I dropped beside her. Her coat was open near the wound, gear scattered like she'd tried to grab her radio or pistol before she went down. Her eyes weren't open, but she was still breathing. Barely. I didn't say anything. What would I have said? There was no time. No field triage kit strong enough to undo what had already started. Noah screamed when he saw her. Ran at the man Bryce had just taken down. I thought he'd shoot him. Instead, he just stood over him, fist clenched, whole body locked in place. The guy didn't speak, didn't even blink, just stared at Jackie like she was a stranger, like none of it made sense. We didn't keep him alive. Bryce didn't say a word, just raised the pistol and ended it. Clean, quick, no hesitation, no glory. But the real damage wasn't the 3 men who came for our supplies. It was what they brought with them. The gunfire pulled them in, first a few, then dozens. Pale shapes breaking through the trees, eyes blank, limbs stiff, moving as one slow wave. No sprinting, no moaning. Just the same steady, tireless shuffle we'd seen before. They came in rows. The snowfall masked their steps at first, just the vague shifting of forms on the edge of the light. Then closer, faces blank, slack-jawed, no awareness, no rage, just motion, as if the sound of our survival alone had summoned them. Sarah fired 2 rounds into the nearest, then pulled Noah off Jackie's body and shoved him toward the trucks. Mitch slammed the hood shut on the Land Cruiser, and Bryce grabbed our remaining fuel jugs. We left the bodies. We had no choice. By the time we cleared the rest stop, the infected were already crossing through our tire tracks, reaching out with cracked, gloved fingers like they could still feel the warmth we left behind. Noah didn't speak for a long time. None of us did. By noon we were picking up a broadcast, short bursts, repeating. Not Cole's voice, but the same frequency, 4.896 megahertz. It wasn't a loop, it was coordinates. One ping, then silence, then again, like someone hitting a signal manually, just long enough to keep the beacon alive. Sarah checked the coordinates twice. Minot, she said. That's where he was. We changed course. That was when everything started to unravel. The further we drove into North Dakota, the less the roads made sense. Plow lines were frozen over, buried under weeks of snow and drift. Street signs had been torn off or twisted sideways by wind. Once, we passed an overturned Department of Transportation vehicle, half buried near the edge of a bridge embankment. Hazard lights still dimly blinking under a skin of ice. We had no choice but to slow down, and every hour we lost put more pressure on fuel. Not just for the engines, but for the heaters. We couldn't sleep without them running anymore. Not in that cold. Not out here. Minot was still over 100 miles out, and by dusk, it was clear we wouldn't make it before nightfall. There was no moon, only clouds, and the wind was picking up again. We didn't want to camp out in the open, not after what happened the night before, but there were no solid structures in range, just silos and long stretches of empty plains. We found cover under an overpass off Highway 83, pulled the trucks into a half circle, and blacked out every window and light source we had. No fire, no signal. Radios stayed quiet. Noah stayed curled in the back seat of the fuel truck, silent under a blanket he hadn't taken off since we left the rest stop. Sarah took first watch. Mitch followed. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Sometime after midnight, I sat up and checked the rear window. The snow had stopped, but something in the darkness made the sky feel heavier. The sound of the wind had shifted. It was too steady, like breath behind a wall. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to Sarah rapping her knuckles on the side of the cab. Not in panic, just enough to say it's time to move. We were wheels up within 5 minutes. No one needed coffee. No one needed to be told what to do anymore. The landscape was changing. Old farmlands gave way to industrial sprawl, pipes, towers, heavy machinery, and pump sites that had frozen in place mid-operation. Somewhere between Glenburn and Ruthville, we passed through a refinery yard, where half the equipment was scorched black. Sarah spotted a body tangled in a chain-link fence. Looked like someone had tried to climb over and hadn't made it. He'd frozen in place, still had both hands locked through the mesh. Then came the real problem. Just 20 miles out from the coordinates, we hit our first full roadblock. Not cars, not snow, a freight train, jackknifed across the valley, cars derailed in both directions, fuel tankers cracked open, frozen solid, boxcars peeled open like soda cans. It had torn straight across the intersection, and there was no shoulder to climb around, not without risking a rollover, and we didn't have the gear to winch or pivot. We were stuck. Mitch scouted the line on foot while the rest of us geared up. The air smelled like rust and ash. A lot of the train's outer shell had been scorched by fire, and most of the cargo was either gutted or looted, but some of the cars were intact, and one of them looked like it had been occupied recently. Burn marks from a small fire on the gravel beside it. A tarp slung against the far wall. The snow around it looked disturbed. Not fresh, not deep, like someone had moved through it. We cleared the car in pairs. It was empty. Not a sign of who had been there, but plenty of indication they'd left in a hurry. Half a map, boot prints, and 3 MRE wrappers. Sarah knelt by the corner where the snow was most churned. She touched it, then stood. "They ran," she said. Bryce found a side road about a mile off, county access route that might have skirted the valley and rejoined the main road past the wreckage. It wasn't paved, but it was open. Mostly. The risk was real, though. If we went that way and the road collapsed, we'd be stranded. Fuel was tight. Options were tighter. We voted to push forward. It took over an hour to navigate the slope and reconnect to the main route, and during that time, the radio signal changed. Instead of the single ping, we started picking up voice fragments again. Warped, chopped up. Most of it was unintelligible, but a few words came through clear enough to pull us forward. Cold inside. Maintain silence. Radio lockout. Repeater access denied. And finally, still here. No name, no location, but it was him. Cole. Same voice from the original broadcast. The rhythm was broken, the signal degraded, but it was unmistakable. Noah sat up for the first time in hours. He's alive. We didn't say anything. We just pushed the trucks faster. We hit the edge of Minot at 0900 hours. The town was flattened. No smoke, no power, no visible movement. But the destruction was surgical, like someone had shelled the outer districts with precision. Buildings weren't collapsed randomly. They were cut open, staggered. There were deep craters where radio towers used to stand. One side of the old hospital complex had burned down, but the other was untouched. Sarah said it first. "Someone cleaned up here." It wasn't the infected. It was too calculated. We moved slow through the city grid, sticking to alleys and tight streets where we could swing the trucks without losing cover. In a residential zone near the industrial yard, we spotted our first cluster. 7 infected, standing shoulder to shoulder at the intersection of a 4-way stop, facing in different directions. Still, not walking, not reacting, just holding position. We stopped 2 blocks away and watched them through optics. Bryce thought maybe they were frozen in place, but I saw one blink. Another moved its jaw, slowly, like it was chewing. They weren't idle. They were waiting. We skirted wide around them. One of them turned its head just slightly as the second truck passed. No chase, no noise, just awareness. The coordinates led us to a distribution warehouse on the north end of town. It matched the story. Cole had mentioned a warehouse snowbound, surrounded, and it was still standing. Barely. The front was partially collapsed, and several of the rear doors had been blown open and then resealed with scrap and welded plates. Generator coils snaked out the back wall into a buried intake. Someone had tried to keep it alive. We pulled the vehicles into a parallel line behind a shattered delivery truck and moved in on foot. Mitch took the left flank. I took the right. Sarah and Bryce covered the rear. Inside, it was silent. Steel racking twisted and blackened by fire. Scorch marks on the ceiling. Signs of struggle everywhere. Bent shelving, broken pallets, empty shell casings. But no bodies. Then we saw him. He was sitting in the center of the storage floor, legs outstretched, back to a crate. A radio clutched in one hand, rifle in the other. Beard overgrown, face gaunt. Flight suit half zipped and stained with weeks of grime. Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole, still alive. I raised a hand. "We got your signal." He didn't move at first. Then he turned his head slowly, blinking like the motion hurt. "You shouldn't be here," he said. We closed in. Sarah crouched beside him, ran a quick check. No obvious wounds, no signs of infection. But something was off. His eyes never focused on any one of us for long. He kept scanning the walls, the ceiling, the shadows behind boxes that weren't there. "You sent the transmission," I said. He nodded once. "I sent the first one, not the second." "What do you mean?" "I shut it down. They turned it back on." I didn't know what to say to that. Behind me, Noah stepped forward. "We came to get you out." Cole didn't answer, just tightened his grip on the radio. "There's no out," he said finally. "This place was the end point. Not a beacon, not a relay, a trap. They wanted someone to find it." Sarah stood slowly. "Who's they?" He looked at her like she'd asked something that didn't matter anymore. Then, for the first time, I saw fear break through whatever exhaustion he was holding on to. "Close the doors," he said. "Right now." I turned. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the horizon was changing. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of infected, emerging from between buildings, climbing over fences, walking shoulder to shoulder through snow and wire and ruin. All silent, all coming this way. Not running, not chasing, just closing in. It wasn't panic that moved us. It was repetition. Every one of us had been in situations like this before. Enough times to know how quickly things could go from still to finished. Sarah was already backpedaling to the loading bay door, checking corners. Bryce motioned to Mitch and Noah, then started uncoiling the fuel hose from the side pack on the truck. I turned to Cole. "You can still walk?" He nodded. Not fast, not confident. But he stood. Rifle in one hand, the small radio unit still clutched in the other. He didn't bother with a bag or gear, just the weapon and that battered transceiver. He didn't even ask where we were going. He moved with us like he already knew the path, and how unlikely it was that we'd survive it. We got him outside without firing a shot. The front of the warehouse was a no-go. Too many infected filtering in from the main intersection, sweeping the road and alley with that same eerie quiet. Their movements were too consistent. Not like wild mobs, not mindless. They drifted like they were pulling from the same playbook. We swung wide to the left, out through the twisted corner where the snowplow had once cut a trench through a roll-up door. Mitch cleared the exit with a handheld flare, then killed it as soon as we were past the breach. Sarah brought up the rear, watching our six while Bryce readied the fuel truck's flame cutoff. The infected didn't respond to the sound of the truck starting. Not immediately, not with speed, but they noticed. Heads turned slowly, bodies pivoted in a fluid, chilling rhythm, like they were pieces of the same machine. We weren't 50 yards out when the first one changed pace. Not a sprint, not a charge. Just a faster, deliberate walk, shoulders hunched, arms stiff, eyes locked forward. Then the rest followed. We peeled out fast. Mitch led in the Land Cruiser. The F-250 and fuel truck followed close. Cole was with me in the passenger seat of the Ford, eyes on the rearview mirror. He didn't say anything as the figures fell away behind us, growing smaller, but never stopping. Just walking, same pace, same direction, no loss of formation. "This started in Korea," he said after a few minutes, "but it wasn't a virus. Not really." I kept my eyes on the road. "What do you mean?" They used the word infection to keep it simple, but that was never what it was. It's neurological, an engineered pattern of decay, controlled, structured, starts with memory, language, ends with obedience. To what? He didn't answer, just stared out at the road ahead. knuckles tightening around the radio. We made it 7 miles before the first engine alert chimed. The fuel truck, heavy, older, half full, had been pushing hard all day, and the terrain wasn't helping. The cold had crept back in fast after the brief morning break, and the wind now howled from the west like it was following us. We had a choice: risk a breakdown in open snow, or make a stand somewhere more defensible. We chose the second. Bryce spotted an old meatpacking plant about a mile north of the main road, off a service track buried under drift. It had steel walls, narrow entrances, and a chain-link perimeter with barbed wire, rusted, but still mostly intact. The place was marked with old CDC quarantine tape, half shredded and fluttering like it had been there since the first month. We didn't care. There was enough room to wedge the trucks inside the outer fence and close the gates behind us. It wouldn't stop them, but it would buy us time. The wind pushed harder as we shut the engines down. I checked the sky. Still no snow falling, but the air carried that bitter static edge that always comes before a front. The kind of cold that stiffens rifle oil and silences everything not tied down. Inside, the plant was worse than we expected. The walls were stained, not with blood but with the chemical runoff of collapse. Abandoned biohazard suits, stretchers warped by rust, floor drains clogged with frozen waste. We moved quick, clearing room after room, then barricading the front entrance and posting Sarah at the only intact window with elevation. She set up with her scope across the sill and locked in her fire angles. Bryce took the second floor with Noah, who still hadn't said more than a sentence since Jackie's death. Mitch and I set up the generator in the main hall and ran a cable out to one of the trucks. We only used it for 15 minutes, long enough to recharge the radio and warm the water bottles. Cole sat in the back, still holding the transceiver. "They're not tracking us," he said. "Not directly. They're just following the signal." "You mean your voice transmission?" "No," he said. "I killed that feed weeks ago. I blew the tower at Tower Echo myself, cut the uplink. But there's something else. Something in the fallback gear. I think it's embedded, hardware level." Mitch walked over and crouched beside him. "What does that mean exactly?" Cole didn't answer right away. He looked at the small antenna protruding from the side of the transceiver like it was a snake he didn't want to touch. Then he spoke again, slower. "It means we've been telling them where we are since the second I turned this back on." We shut the radio down immediately, pulled the battery, crushed the antenna, buried it under a steel crate. It might have helped, but we didn't feel the relief. The sound outside had changed, subtle at first, then clearer. The fence rattled, not violently, not like something trying to break in, just consistently, like hands running across every inch of the wire, slow and steady. The wind didn't make that sound. We turned off the interior lights and crept to the front. They had found us. Not all of them, not the whole swarm, but dozens, easy, spread out in the dark, standing just beyond the fence, watching. At first, it didn't register. The snow was still falling, light now, soft flakes swirling under the floodlights. I thought they were just shadows, old wrecks, half-covered posts, but the shapes were too still, too upright. When one shifted, just a tilt of the head, I knew. Some pressed their faces against the wire, slowly. No aggression, no reaching hands or snarls, just contact, skin to steel, like they were listening through the fence. Others walked the perimeter, quiet, measured steps, pausing every few paces as if checking positions. Their boots left shallow trails in the snow, spaced evenly. Too evenly. I turned my scope toward the gate. That's when I saw the ones kneeling. 3 of them, maybe 4. They weren't trying to break through. They weren't even touching the gate. Just crouching at the base, moving snow in slow arcs, clearing it away one handful at a time. Not digging with urgency, clearing. That part locked me in place. It wasn't random. This wasn't instinct or chance. It wasn't hunger either. It was behavior. Repeated, methodical, like something they'd been taught or had done before. It made my skin crawl. Sarah stood near the southwest barricade, her finger on the trigger guard of her rifle, but she didn't raise it. Neither did Bryce or Mitch. We all just watched, scopes tracking movement, bodies motionless. Breaths held longer than they should have been. The sound of the wind seemed to mute under it, like even the air was afraid to move. 15 minutes passed, maybe more. We didn't talk, didn't whisper, just stood at our posts, frozen in our own minds. The infected didn't act like they saw us. Not really. They looked through us, or beyond us. Then, without a signal, without sound, they stopped. Not slowly, not staggered. All at once. One by one, like a slow wave sweeping over the yard, they turned their backs to the building and stood still, motionless, silent, facing outward. I felt something then I hadn't felt since Seoul, the sense of being part of something larger than I could understand. Not fear exactly, something deeper, a feeling that we were not just outnumbered, but outplayed. That was worse than anything they could have done. We didn't break position, no one moved, no one dared to test what would happen if we crossed that threshold again. The moment had changed. Whatever they were waiting for, it wasn't us. Or maybe it was, and we were already too deep inside to know. We held position for the rest of the night. No sleep, no change. The cold crept in under our clothes and gear, setting into joints and fingers. Mitch rubbed his knees every few minutes to keep feeling. Bryce leaned against the back of the rig, his eyes on the fence line. Sarah muttered something into her scarf about it not making sense, but didn't repeat it. Noah just sat next to Jackie's old pack, knees tucked up, staring at the empty hatch in the snow where she'd bled out. When dawn came, they were still there, facing outward like statues, eyes fixed on nothing. It wasn't until the sun hit full above the tree line that we let ourselves exhale. The silhouettes didn't change. Some had snow on their shoulders now. Others stood in shadows that made their faces unreadable. Still, not one moved, not a twitch. It was like they'd been placed there, like set pieces in a broken scene. Bryce volunteered to go up to the roof with Mitch to check the surrounding area. Neither wanted to split off, but we needed the height advantage. We had to know how far the pattern extended. They moved slow, careful. Up through the grain chute ladder and out onto the rusted metal sheet roof. The snow up top hadn't drifted as hard, only a thin crust, perfect for scanning without making too much sound. They came back down half an hour later. Both looked shaken. "There's more," Mitch said. "North, south, even along the service road, spaced out evenly, like sentries." "All facing away," Bryce added. "Even the ones deeper in, like the ones right here, are just the outer ring." We tried to process it, to map it in our heads. I pulled out the only remaining page of our topographic sheet and marked where we'd seen movement. But there was no logic to it. Just circles, overlapping zones, lines that spiraled in on us. "They're not surrounding us," Mitch said. "They're surrounding something else, like we're in it now, inside the pattern." We didn't understand what that meant, not then, but Cole did. "I've seen this before," he said, "right before Tower Echo fell." Noah finally spoke. "Then how'd you make it out?" Cole didn't respond. He just looked toward the southern wall, where the snow had started drifting in again through the broken vent. The silence stretched. "We need to move," Sarah said. I agreed. We couldn't stay here. Not if we were broadcasting something. Not if the infected were mapping terrain now, instead of swarming like animals. We repacked the trucks, moved slow, double-checked every seal. We left the crushed transceiver behind, buried it under a collapsed work table and locked the door. The infected didn't react when we opened the gate. They didn't stop us. They didn't even turn around. We drove past them one by one, and they stood still, every single one of them, facing the same direction, as if we were no longer relevant, as if the part we were meant to play had already ended. We cleared the town before noon, found the main route north jammed by an overturned flatbed. It had military markings, blacked out now, but I recognized the rigging as something used for transporting communication crates. Most of the equipment had been scavenged, but not all of it. In the snow beside it, covered in frost, was a transmitter, still powered, still blinking, one red light, one green, and a soft rhythmic ping, 4.896 megahertz. No one said anything for the next few miles. The trucks rolled on in a loose, staggered column across Route 5, engines grinding low, tires clawing through hard-packed snow that hadn't seen a plow in weeks. The wind was shifting again, slower now, less violent. It didn't sound like weather anymore. It sounded like breath. Long, slow exhalations rolling off the open prairie from every direction, never rising into a howl, never dropping into silence. Just the sound of something watching, waiting. Cole sat in the cab beside me, staring down at his hands like they weren't entirely his. He hadn't spoken since we left the warehouse in Minot, not beyond short answers. But the blinking transmitter back there must have triggered something. His knuckles were white around the stock of his rifle, and his lips moved once or twice, silently, like he was practicing words before speaking them aloud. After the highway bent south around the edge of a windswept ravine, he finally turned toward me. "I had a crew," he said. "2 birds. Chalk 1 went silent near the DMZ. We were already airborne when everything broke open in Korea. First wave. It looked biological at first, but nothing matched the playbook. No fever, no rage. Collapse, then reanimation. We lost Campbell before we even touched down. I saw soldiers firing at each other in the barracks. Command was silent. Fuel depots empty. We scavenged what we could and kept flying east, looking for fallback zones. By the time we hit Tennessee, all 3 were overrun. No signals, no chain of command." I kept one eye on the road as he talked. His voice never rose above a low, even tone. Near Biloxi, we were ambushed by organized civilians. They wanted the helicopter, not the supplies. We beat them off, but it shook everyone. Nobody died there. Malik vanished 2 nights later at a refuel strip near Oaks, North Dakota. He stepped out to check the pumps and never came back. No blood, no tracks once the wind filled in. "What about the others?" I asked quietly. "The pilot, Devereaux, disappeared inside that snow-choked warehouse in Minot. One moment he was covering the north stairwell, the next he was gone. No signs of a break-in, no struggle, just his rifle on the floor. The last man in my circle was Kern, a civilian virologist. He stayed behind at a black site bunker east of Jefferson City with data he said was too dangerous to move. I still don't know if he made it." I thought about that for a long moment. "So you were alone?" "I reached Tower Echo alone. Buried node west of Williston. Uploaded everything. Operation Sable Dawn, Z-21 engineering notes, outbreak projections, confirmation the release was deliberate." He let that hang for a second, then turned to face me fully. His voice hardened. "The relay was compromised. I shut it down, but someone turned it back on." I didn't ask who. I already knew the answer didn't matter anymore. After a long silence, he spoke again. "There's a fallback depot, last known logistics marker before the broadcast went dark, sealed by the 82nd about 6 months ago. Not a command post, just a buried supply node. Weapons, comms, cold weather gear, enough to matter." "Where?" He tapped a point on the old map we kept spread across the dash. A town marked only by a faded name. Bowman, just shy of the South Dakota border. Agricultural region, low population, quiet since before the fall. "It was redacted in the public evacuation orders," Cole added. "Left off the FEMA maps, standard protocol. Even most airborne crews didn't know it was there. That's why it might still be intact." Sarah confirmed it from the Land Cruiser. She'd picked up a second fragment from the same frequency, coordinates buried in a routing ping. Bowman was the endpoint. That changed our course. We pushed south by southwest, staying off the major roads. The infected weren't sprinting, but they were never far. Always just at the edge of what we could see. On ridgelines, in ditches, on rooftops, unmoving, watching. Each time we stopped to check fuel or recalibrate direction, we found more of them. Not close, just present. They were surrounding without pressing in, as if waiting for something. As night approached, we debated whether to try and reach the fallback site in one push, or camp short of it and arrive at dawn. Fuel was running low, Mitch's truck was pulling heavier than it should have, and the battery readouts on the fuel rig were dropping fast. We chose to move. That stretch between Minot and Bowman felt like it would never end. Every small town was the same. Burned, buried, or worse. No bodies. Just empty intersections. Windows shattered from the inside. School buses half submerged in ice. We passed a grain elevator with claw marks on the upper platform rails. 15 feet off the ground. No explanation. At 0200 hours, we hit the southern edge of Bowman. It didn't look like a depot, not from the surface. A cluster of old farming structures, irrigation pipes, and what used to be a co-op silage tank. The warehouse wasn't visible. No perimeter, no active signals. But Cole found the beacon buried on the secondary band. A single narrow signal locked behind encryption. Passive, waiting for proximity handshake. He keyed the code manually. The ground opened up 30 yards from the field's edge. Just a click, a soft hydraulic release. Then a metal slab shifted outward, revealing a recessed hatch covered in frost and dirt. The design was military, modular, prefab, same shape and angle as any number of bunkers I'd seen back before the collapse. Cole approached it carefully. He didn't touch the handle. "Watch the trees," he said. We covered the entrance while Bryce and Mitch cleared the nearby slope for elevation and lines of sight. There was no movement, no sign of the infected. Not yet, but the wind had stopped again. Not slowed. Stopped, like someone had killed it with a switch. Cole opened the hatch. The smell hit first. Not death, not rot, dust, filtered air that hadn't moved in months. He descended with Noah behind him. I followed, rifle ready, one boot at a time on the ladder. The walls were steel, sprayed with thermal coating, and the lights flickered on automatically once we were halfway down. Emergency battery power, still functional. At the bottom was a narrow corridor and a set of heavy doors marked with faded lettering, "You as a sock cold strike node B3. Inside was silence. Not damage, not chaos, just abandonment. Crates sealed, racks full, communications gear stacked neatly against the far wall. 2 sealed lockers marked with thermal hazard signs, and 1 dry ration cabinet filled top to bottom. It was intact, untouched. We moved fast, stocked up and pulled comms packs, replacement cold gear, and sealed batteries. Replaced 2 cracked rifle optics. Sarah finally swapped out her backup mags. She'd been using the same ones for over 2 weeks. The ammo here was clean, preserved. It felt like winning a lottery. But then, Cole stopped us. "This isn't the primary site," he said. "This is a bleed-off node. There's another one, deeper. This one was left open for surface teams. What we're looking for is the command stack. We found it behind the last wall, hidden behind an angled pressure door that looked more like a vault than a bunker entry. The door was locked, manual override only. Cole pried the panel open and started working the wheel. He paused halfway through. Then he looked up. "They'll come now." The moment the door unsealed, something shifted outside. Not noise, not footsteps, just the feeling, pressure in the air changing, like everything above had just inhaled. We finished clearing the vault. Inside were 3 racks of broadcast gear, a fuel cell generator, and something that looked like a prototype relay beacon. Cole froze. "This wasn't here last time," he said. "This is new." The beacon was active. Small lights pulsed gently on the side, in patterns I didn't recognize. Next to it, on a shelf, was a handwritten logbook. No name, just timestamps. Each one marked with a frequency and a 3-digit code. The last line was underlined. "Transmission complete. Return signal pending." Cole didn't move for a long time. When he did, he stepped back and motioned us out. "We need to leave this place. Right now." We didn't argue. We sealed the vault again, locked it behind us, and climbed out. As I hit the surface, the first figure stepped into view at the edge of the tree line. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire tree line was shifting. Hundreds, maybe more, not sprinting, not screaming, just walking. At first, I didn't understand the scale. When they came from the woods, they seemed spaced, distant. It was only when the bodies started appearing behind them, from deeper in the dark, in lines that filled every opening between branches and trunks, that I saw it for what it was. Not a swarm, but a formation. No coordination in the traditional sense. No barking orders, no banners, just a shape, a slow, wide front moving in perfect silence, each infected locked in place among the others, as if each one knew exactly how close the next would be. I shouted to Mitch and Sarah. Bryce was already dragging crates back toward the trucks. Noah stood frozen, staring at the woods as if he saw something we didn't. Cole didn't move. He just looked across the field, then at the open hatch, then back at the woods again. "They're not here for the signal," he said. "They're here for us." We fell back, fast. Trucks reoriented to face the outbound track. We weren't the first ones to try using this site, and the tire grooves from older attempts had left just enough clearance to cut through the outer field. We'd just reached the vehicles when Noah shouted something from behind the nearest silo. I turned, rifle ready, and saw what he saw. A second entrance, hatch already open, and people. A dozen of them, maybe more. 2 women, 2 kids, both under 10, one wrapped in a red jacket that barely fit. The rest were men, dirty, bundled in layers, gaunt. One of them was wearing an army parka, rank worn flat, old 101st patch fraying on the sleeve. His weapon was real, M4, shortened barrel, civilian optic. He was trained, or at least had been. He held it low but didn't point it at us. They'd come out of a secondary tunnel, maybe an older service entry, had likely been using the underground supply stack for weeks, maybe longer. They didn't look surprised to see us, but they looked terrified of what was coming behind us. The man with the parka stepped forward. "We saw your trucks. We've been trying to reach someone for days. Then last night, we saw them surrounding the woods." Cole stared at him. "You used the transmitter." The man hesitated. Briefly, enough to see if anyone was still out there. "You told them where to look," Cole said flatly. We didn't have time for the blame. The front edge of the infected had reached the fence perimeter, though it was symbolic at best. Rusted posts and scattered wire, mostly buried in ice. One of the infected caught its leg on a low run of wire, fell forward, and kept crawling on hands and knees. The others adjusted pace, slowed slightly, made room, then stepped over it. The man in the parka gave a quiet order to his group. They moved fast. 2 of the adults pulled the children into the shadows of a service trench. Another man ran back toward the open hatch to pull out what looked like a fuel container. One of the women carried a shotgun that looked almost too heavy for her, but they weren't helpless, just out of options. Bryce shouted to me. The fuel truck was struggling, battery redlined. It would take another 10 minutes to warm enough to move without risk of stalling. We didn't have 10 minutes. The first infected crossed into the field. Cole raised his weapon but didn't fire. I didn't either. Neither did Sarah. They were still too far, still slow. We didn't want to fire until it was necessary, but the front rank had adjusted formation, bending slightly, curling inward like the head of a tightening snare. They weren't just chasing movement, they were surrounding it. Mitch shouted something from the other side of the truck. A second wave, coming from the west, slower, staggered, but real. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random drift. They were channeling us. The man in the parka, who'd introduced himself as Curtis, pointed to a culvert on the far side of the yard. Old infrastructure, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. "That runs out to the rail line," he said. "About 1/3 of a mile. There's a service shed at the end. Steel walls. Lockable." "Too far," Sarah said. "Not with kids." "Then someone holds them here." I looked at Cole. He was already moving toward the truck. "We'll draw them," he said. "You take the civilians and run. Get to the shed. If there's anything there, comms, gear, maps, you'll need it." Sarah moved first. She shouted for Curtis's group to follow. The woman with the shotgun handed it off to one of the other men. Too much weight for the crawl. One of the kids dropped a stuffed animal and didn't notice. Noah picked it up and shoved it into his own coat. Bryce stayed behind. I told him not to. He said he wasn't running again. We pulled the 2 trucks into a cross angle at the front of the open lot, tires wedged against the silo base. Bryce climbed onto the roof of the fuel rig and unholstered a road flare. He lit it, then held it over his head like a beacon. The light bounced off the falling snow like it was smoke. The infected saw it. All of them. They moved faster, Still silent, still no screaming, but faster now. Heads angled forward, arms stiffer. That machine-like efficiency again, like watching ice reform after being shattered. I climbed onto the hood of the F-250, rifle at the ready. Mitch took the other side, laying prone behind the engine block with his scope trained on the front line. Cole checked the action on his sidearm and placed the spare mags along the dash inside the cab. The infected reached the front line. We fired. 3 went down in the first volley. Headshots. They dropped like mannequins tipped from a shelf. No flinching, no twitching. The others didn't stop. They walked over the bodies. One even stumbled but didn't change direction. They weren't distracted. They weren't confused. They were just absorbing it. Bryce stood tall on the roof and threw the flare as far as he could into the western tree line. It arced beautifully, hit a drift, and burned hot. Some of the infected turned toward it. Only some. Then we heard it. Screams from the culvert. Not infected. One of the civilians. The man with the fuel container had dropped it in the trench and slipped. He hadn't been able to move fast enough. He was being pulled out of the tunnel opening by 2 infected who had somehow flanked the side yard. Sarah doubled back. I saw her vanish into the trench with the others. A second shot rang out, then a third, then silence. We held fire, waited. Curtis emerged 30 seconds later, dragging the woman with the shotgun by one arm. She was limp. The others were already gone, into the trees toward the shed. Cole ordered the retreat. Mitch laid down cover as we pulled back from the rigs. Bryce was still firing from the roof, even as the infected began to climb the front bumper and pull themselves onto the hood. One reached the cab, another slammed into the passenger door, the third cracked the side window and reached through with both arms. He never screamed. We ran. Behind us, the trucks exploded. We didn't do it. Bryce must have lit the reserve tank. The fire lit the entire sky. We saw it even after we reached the shed. Sarah was already inside with Curtis, the remaining woman, 1 child, and Cole. Noah stumbled in just behind me. The kid he'd carried had gone quiet. Not dead, just silent. We slammed the door, sealed it. Then we listened. Outside, the wind screamed again, but it wasn't wind. They had followed us, even after the fire, even after the losses. We held the door through the night. By dawn, the noise faded. When we stepped outside, there were fewer of us. Curtis hadn't made it. He'd been cut on the crawl through the tunnel. Infection? Blood loss? We couldn't tell. The child in the red coat had gone stiff during the night. Too much cold. No one noticed until it was too late. Noah stayed sitting by the wall for hours. We moved again at dusk, south. We had what was left of the map. 2 rifles. No food. Cole never said where we were going next, only that there wouldn't be another signal. And this time, he was right. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.